I think is out there is this notion that chastity, real chastity, is not possible anymore today. Maybe it was at one time, maybe not, but it's really not anymore, right? That pornography and all the rest of it is just everywhere. It's omnipresent, and it's too strong, it's too powerful. Everyone's doing this. How could you possibly imagine a life without it? And that's just a bunch of baloney, but it's just that people, I think, believe that nonsense, right? And sometimes they're even told that by people who should know better. Even I've heard it from priests in the confessional have told young people this. And so I think that's very discouraging for someone to hear. I mean, it really is a kind of counsel of despair.
Welcome to the Ferris Love Podcast. Here we explore spiritual insights and practical strategies to help you cultivate a family life rooted in beautiful, self-giving love. Join us as we invite experts to share uplifting perspectives and actionable advice for navigating the joys and challenges of modern family dynamics.
Hello and welcome back to the Ferris Love Podcast. Today I have a very exciting guest with me. I have Father Carter Griffin. Hi, Father. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you.
For the viewers who may not be familiar with who you are and the work that you do you want to give a quick little overview?
Sure. Yeah. I'm a priest of the Archdiocese of Washington, and right now I'm the rector of St. John Paul II Seminary here in Washington, D.C., which is a college seminary. We have usually between 50 and 60 men who are here any given time studying at Catholic University. And so I'm the rector there. I've been here for 15 years. I'm actually shortly going to a parish, which will be exciting this coming summer. I've written a number of books, some for seminarians and priests, and some, I did one for families and family formation and an apologetics book. But this latest one is on helping especially young men, but just young people in general, grow in holy purity. And it's called Reclaimed.
Yeah. It sounds like you have a wide variety of works. And I'm sure we could have many podcasts going through each of your books and talking about a whole number of topics. But yes, like you said, your most recent book is Reclaimed: Win the War of Freedom, Self-Mastery, and Holy Purity, which I have to say, that's a fantastic title. And I think it's something that's very needed today. But what was the motivation behind the book?
Well, I mean, I guess more than anything else, it wasn't like a single moment, but it was like a cumulative sort of growing sense of there's something needed in this space. There's a lot of great resources out there for people who are struggling with purity, or growing in purity. But a lot of them, number one, a lot of them were online, which, is a little bit counterproductive for some guys. And some of them were, they weren't maybe as deep as I would have wanted. Like I remember thinking, like, it's great to have like an initial, so maybe a step-by-step process or whatever it might be. Accountability groups are fantastic, all these things. But what I found missing was sort of a single resource written for young men, but that kind of covers a lot of ground. So you have something, because people are different, and some, like, they'll jump right into that accountability group and they'll love it. But some kind of need something to take back and read and underline and think about and pray about. And I didn't see a lot of that out there. So this was kind of filling, a niche, but it's like part of a larger picture of, I think, a growing set of great resources for people who want to grow in purity, especially young people.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that your work with young men, you're able to see, just like you said, there's a ton of different personalities and different things that work for different people, but there may be something that's falling in the cracks, and you're probably able to see it because you work with so many young men.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think working with young men, and frankly, working with young men who also come from very different family backgrounds, and kind of seeing how different families have tried to work through this issue and tried to help young guys kind of grow in this issue. Some of them incredibly successfully, and some less so. So seeing that.
Yeah.
And also, I think just learning about, I was just learning a little bit more about, especially some of the temptations that young people are dealing with today, and they're kind of becoming sort of uglier and uglier, and it's amazing to, I mean, it's just to imagine being a young kid today, and like just with these things being thrown at you. And so anyway, anything we can do to help these young folks who are trying to come along, especially those who want to be chaste and want to be pure, is needed.
I want to kind of touch on, you said you've worked with, different men from different family backgrounds, and obviously, there's not a one size fits all.
Right.
It doesn't exist. But what have you seen work with, some of these in the parenting style or just in the family life? Like, what is working given this like current landscape of young people getting so much thrown at them through just the rise of technology. And I think our culture's gotten desensitized to so many things. How can families
Yeah.
try and combat it?
Yeah, I actually have something coming out in the register shortly about this very topic. But I think a couple of things that are definitely consistent, regardless of different parenting styles and sizes
Yeah.
of families, or homeschool or Catholic school or public school, all these differences. But one consistent thing is that parents of kids who have a kind of a running shot, at least, of growing a chastity, are having conversations early and regularly. Like
Mm,
that's across the board. It just doesn't happen otherwise. I think. I mean,
yeah.
maybe some will, but so that you're having, the average age of first exposure to pornography right now is like 9 or 10, maybe 11 years old. So you have to have
Crazy.
the first conversation well before that, probably 8 or 9, and then have it regularly, and also just build an environment where those conversations just happen kind of naturally, and
Hmm.
small questions that come up here and there. It doesn't have to be these big formal sit downs every time, but when there is a sit down, it's like it's not awkward, it's not weird, it's not uncomfortable, it's not
Yeah.
cringy. It's just a simple conversation about something, and it just builds trust with the children to be able to come. So I think that's one thing. Communication is huge. I think how they deal with screens is really important. I mean, social
Hmm.
media has to be, if done at all, as late as possible.
Yeah.
For young people. And restriction of the physical limitations from the phones, all that kind of stuff that everyone is kind of talking about. Thankfully, talking about.
Hmm.
I think one other kind of element that can be very important is sort of how to form the imagination of
Mm.
children. I think the very deliberate efforts on the part of some of these companies to kind of capture the attention economy, like basically trying to capture our child's and our attention,
Hmm.
but it often is equivalent to really capturing their imagination.
Yeah.
If there are ways of engaging your child's imagination that go beyond a two-dimensional screen, then those should
Hmm.
be taken as early and as often as possible. So getting outside, playing sports, playing an instrument, playing a board game, whatever, going to a museum, going to a battlefield, it doesn't matter, like just something, like
Yeah.
get outside of that screen world and like somehow feed that imagination. I think that goes a long way. So those are
Hmm.
just some of the things. Obviously, there's the interior life question of like, bringing them to the fonts of grace, all kinds
Yeah.
of other things. But those are some things that I've seen consistent among families.
Those are really good tips, and I think that it's so needed. I recently saw an ad. It was ironically for a social media platform,
Mm,
but it made the point that we no longer are able to develop a sense of self and like our
mm,
likes and our dislikes because we are so immersed in a world where our likes are dictated by the likes of others. And so the speaker, whoever running the ad, was basically saying, how do we decide what we like if we don't see anybody else liking it as well? And so it's an interesting thing to think about where you're
mm.
suddenly thinking, wait, how do I know what I like? Is it because
Yeah,
everybody
yeah, yeah.
else around me likes it? So, but I think, yeah, engaging the imagination in real life scenarios is important, and what you feed into the brain of your child also plays a role too. So, yeah, very good tips. In your book, you talk about a battle plan. You kind of talk about like intentionality. So, why is intentionality rather than just trying harder the key to masculine growth?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for a couple of reasons. One of them
Yeah.
is intentionality suggests that you've kind of thought through something carefully, right? We kind of use that
Mhm.
terminology. Sort of, I was very
Yeah.
intentional about that, and
Mhm.
and I think that this is not a kind of a fight, for this virtue. Can't be done on the fly. I don't think it can be done like, what, I'll just kind of wake up and start working for, towards holy purity. Other virtues, you may be able to do that, like growing in patience, like I'm just going to start being more patient in the car today.
Mhm.
It's like I'm just going to whatever it might be, right? And but purity really takes, and for a lot of reasons, one of them is just the power of these passions, right? I mean, they're just very, very strong passions that we all have. And I think another reason is that they are being very consciously and deliberately manipulated by
Yeah.
people with very, very extensive resources and a kind of sort of, there's a sense in which there are no scruples whatsoever. I mean, they will do anything to get your child's, click, right? And so,
Mhm.
and they're paying grown adults a lot of money to try to figure out how to trap your child, in that regard. So I think there's something really, really sinister about it. And that needs to be dealt with. You can't just kind of deal with enemies like that, kind of willy-nilly. It has to be very clear. And
Yeah.
I think there's also sort of just I don't know. It's not a single answer to this, and people are so
Yeah.
different. Like how they struggle, what their struggle actually is. I mean, those who are struggling with, pornography are dealing with, and others who are struggling with some of these hookup apps, and some are, it's neither of those. It's not a digital thing at all. Whatever it might be. So like people are struggling in different ways, and it's also a virtue that allows for a great deal of refinement, right? So it's not just a matter of overcoming sinful behavior, but it's really growing. I mean, one of the big points that I try to make in the book is that chastity is an incredibly beautiful virtue, and it's really
Mhm.
part of living a fulfilled human life. It's not just avoiding sin, but it's actually how we live as incarnate, how we love as incarnate beings, right? How we love
Mhm.
as embodied beings. So it's a huge part of the Christian life. It's not the most important, maybe in some ways, but I mean, charity is, but in a way, this is charity, right? It's how we live charity in a body. So it's a hugely important thing that we want to take very seriously, and how we struggle with it differs. And so we need a lot of different kind of very practical suggestions of winning the battles when it's a fight again, when it's sort of something that we're overcoming, but also in how we can grow and ultimately grow in holiness through the virtue. So I think in that sense, it's a very broad virtue that takes a certain intentionality, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I would agree. I heard a thing that kind of explained chastity is, yes, it's the virtue of purity and like in the physical sense, but then also it's and like in the mind,
Hmm.
but it's broader in the sense of it's how you view others in their dignity,
Yeah.
because I think an unchaste person seeks to possess someone or something, where to look at the human being, you have to, the way it was put was a virginal gaze of this is not someone I own or try and possess. This is someone who in their
Yeah.
existence is a child of God. And so like it extends into how we view the dignity of others, which I think was a really beautiful way of putting it. It's
Yeah.
so much more than just lust, which is, at the forefront.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I think one of the reasons why we're seeing, I don't know, kind of the world, at least our part of the world, sort of collapse in on itself, and kind of there's a lot of the impatience with each other, and the kind of the alienation that people experience, the anxieties. I think a lot of it comes, frankly, I don't want to put all it at the feet of the sexual revolution, but I mean, I think a lot of it was the sexual revolution. I mean, I just, it, in the name of free love and all the rest of that nonsense, I mean, all it did is really, I think, destroy a lot of the bonds that held us together.
Hmm.
And so I think there's a strong desire now to push back against that,
Yeah.
and I applaud that. And I just think that podcasts like yours are an example of it, right? And people who are interested in trying to live a more human and a life that has more communion with others. And
Hmm.
that's going to always mean chastity, right? You
Yeah.
cannot do that in a lustful kind of environment.
Exactly. Yeah. Since your book is written for men, obviously we kind of branched out to just everybody, but what do you think are some of the biggest lies that young men believe today about what it means to be a man? Because, you mentioned how there's just so much seeping in and it's being marketed to us and in a really hardcore way.
Yeah.
But what are some of the lies that you think that men are having to combat nowadays?
Yeah. And if I could just start with the parentheses and say that it's true that the book was primarily written for men, but in my research, I also began to realize, as you probably know, that I mean, just how skyrocketing it is for women to be using
Hmm.
pornography and to struggle in the same way. And that's been a very deliberate effort. I mean, it's been something like it's a way of just increasing market share. I mean, it's all very sort of intentional in that regard. And so I think, probably 90% of the struggles that men and women have, like, or the responses to them are probably overlap. There are differences for sure. And one of them is what you just mentioned, which is like how men see and how women see themselves. Like for women, there's often a lot more shame that's involved in this than there is in men. I mean, there's a lot of shame in men too, obviously, but that could be a big difference. But I think for men, to me, where I think the biggest lies are is a misunderstanding in a sense, the purpose of our manhood, right? The purpose of our masculinity. What is masculinity supposed to be ordered to? And it
Mm.
seems to me that or what I firmly believe, is that it's ordered to the gift of self for the sake of the other in a sacrificial way, even to the point of sacrificing one's own life.
Yeah.
There's interesting studies by like evolutionary biologists who will talk about like the male and the female. And in virtually every species, the female is sort of the high value part of the species, because that's going to make sure the species continues on. So, I mean, that's obviously
Hmm.
a very kind of scientific question and so forth, but that the male is, in a fundamental sense, expendable. And I think how that translates into rational souls like ours, is that the man has to be able to give himself for those he loves, especially
Hmm.
for his family and for his community, for his country. And so I think that's a big part of what our man is about. And instead, what young men especially are being enticed with is a vision of masculinity, which is just about serving themselves, right? And
Yeah.
grasping what they want, and power is what makes you into a real man. And dominion and domination over others is more manly than actually being at the service and sacrificing yourself for others. And I think those are some of the biggest lies. And of course that in the sexual realm means that real men are the ones who can get anyone they want to hop into bed with them, at any time for any reason, and all the rest. That kind of, that's real sexual prowess and so forth. I mean, these are all, and they're all basically ways of keeping men as adolescents, for their life.
Yeah.
And so it's a huge lie. And I think one other lie that I think is out there is this notion that chastity, real chastity, is not possible anymore today. Maybe it was at one time, maybe not, but
Mm.
it's really not anymore, right? That pornography and all the rest of it is just everywhere. It's omnipresent, and it's too strong. It's too powerful. Everyone's doing this. How could you possibly imagine a life without it? Even if you could sin a little bit less often, you're still going to commit serious sins every now and again. And that's just a bunch of baloney, but it's just that
Yeah.
people, I think, believe that nonsense, right? And sometimes they're even told that by people who should know better.
Hmm.
Even I've heard it from priests in the confessional have told young people this. And so I think that's very discouraging for someone to hear. I mean, it really is a kind of counsel of despair, right? It's like, no, God's promises are not true, right? He really
Hmm.
doesn't want to free you. Not entirely. He'll free you
Yeah.
somewhat, but not all the way. And that's a huge lie, right? So those, I think, are some of the most potent lies that are out there.
Yeah, I think that that's so true that this may be a little bit of a hot take, but we have gotten so desensitized to scandal. And I'm not saying I'm not saying we bring back shame. That's not what I'm trying to say, but it's just we don't care. There's an indifference when it comes, in culture, and even it's starting to seep into Catholic spaces where it's just so normalized. Oh, you guys are living together before you get married. Okay, that's fine. You're going to get married eventually, so it's okay. And it's like, yes, you can leave room for every situation. There can be understanding to some extent, but at the same time, as Catholics, we're supposed to uphold each other and call each other higher, and at the same time be each other's cheerleaders of, you can do this. It's
Right.
hard. It's really hard, but you can do it. And so I think, yeah, your point of this lie that it's not attainable anymore is really damaging to
Yeah.
people trying, at least. Because then they
I
think, oh,
was
there's no point. Yeah.
right. No, I think that's right on the target. I was giving a talk, I don't know, maybe a month ago, to a group of families and parents, and just about some of these topics. And this couple came up to me afterwards, and big, huge guy. And she was like, basically there's a danger if she were to get pregnant again. But, I'm not going to
Yeah.
get into any details. But I mean, bottom line was that they wanted to know if they needed to abstain from having sexual relations right then. Right. And the answer was, unless, you could be very conservative with NFP, but I mean, basically the answer is yes, there needs to be a period of time. And he was like, great, now I know. Like, I just needed to know, right? And it's like, I can do that, right? And it's like, and it was going to be hard for him, and and for her too, but especially for, I guess that was the real question was, does she have an obligate, whatever. So,
Yeah.
but it was an interesting, like, it was just a little insight, is that he was totally fine with it, but he needed to hear clarity, right? And clarity
Hmm.
that this is what's needs to happen here, and you can do this. And he was like
Yeah.
totally fine with it, right? And I'm
Hmm.
not saying everyone would have that same reaction. I'm sure some would not be as happy about it or as content with that. But I do think people are ready to hear the truth if it's spoken in love and it's spoken in conviction and in confidence. The power of God's grace and his desire to free us, there's nothing stronger than that out there, right? No
Hmm.
army of psychologists and, trying to trap you is stronger than that.
Yeah.
So I think that we have to be sort of heralds of hope in this whole matter too. Because
Yeah.
otherwise it's just, what's the point? It's like everyone's just going to kind of fumble around until, and it's just, that's not the greatness of the life that God has called us to.
Yeah. And, kind of following up on that question of, obviously women they're having a harder time combating the sins of lust as well. As time's going on, we're seeing
Mhm.
the number of women who are struggling with pornography rise. But also, I think a lot of times people or society, just we think that porn, chastity, those types of sins, they're just a guy's problem. But what can women do to help combat these lies too. Because I really like Venerable Fulton Sheen has a thing about where when a man loves a woman, he must strive to be worthy of her. And he goes on to say that you can learn about a culture by its women, because we are the ones that hold the standard. We are the ones that tell and allow men to rise higher. So I would love to know, what do you think is something that women, wives, can do to help their men be more masculine and rise to these virtues?
Yeah. It's a big question. It's a great question, but it's a good one.
Yeah.
It's big because I think, speaking very generally, first of all,
Yeah.
there is there's a power that women have to draw manhood out of men and to draw fatherhood out of men. I would say both of them, right? Manhood, in the sense of what I was talking about earlier, the sacrifice, the capacity to sacrifice. That kind of that willingness to lay down your life for others, the protective instinct, all of these things, right? For a woman to honor that, to appreciate that, and to be grateful for it. I mean, it was, what is it? George Steinbeck said that a boy never becomes a man unless he's needed, or something like that. It was kind of it's neat. Like, a man has
Yeah.
to be needed, and if it's just like we're constantly and women, I mean, to their credit, like are graduating in higher numbers, they're making more money, they're like, they're all these things are happening right now, and men sit around and like, I guess I'm not needed to protect anybody anymore, physically protect them, and
Hmm.
and women are just leapfrogging past men in so many ways. And a lot of guys are like, well, then I guess I'm not needed. And then they remain boys, right? And so I
Yeah.
think there is this place for men to step up, obviously, but for women to encourage that. And it's not by the scold, and it's not by the nagging, and it's not by the niggling. It's by calling somebody to something more than he's given right there, to show that he's needed, I think, is really important. So a woman, I think, can honor manhood in that way, just as men obviously are called to honor women. So I think that's a big thing. I think another thing is, that's mainly in terms of masculinity. And then in terms of fatherhood, there's and the key thing about fatherhood and motherhood, obviously, is that it's this incredibly generous pouring out of self for the sake of another, right? One who is utterly, totally dependent on you. And we've all, I suppose, been in a situation where, like, a newlywed couple has their first child, and it's like the mother just seems to know what to do, and the father is completely clueless, but she shows him how to hold the child, how to whatever, feed the child, whatever it might be, how to change a diaper, and she's able to kind of somehow draw this kind of generosity out of him, right? When he's first tempted to kind of leave, because he always plays poker on Friday night, and she's
Hmm.
like, I kind of need you here tonight, right? And that's like showing him, like, okay, no, I'm called to something. I now have responsibility for a child too. It's not, there's ways that I think that she can bring that out of him. And so I think there's masculinity, there's kind of there's the fatherhood that a woman has a capacity to, and then frankly her own expectations, right? That she has and should have expectations about how men will treat her,
Hmm.
and that she holds to those, right? That a lot of times women struggle, as anyone does, with self-esteem, and they're like looking for kind of some of that affirmation from others, and they maybe find it in ways that are not healthy or not good for them. But that doesn't help men either, right? It hurts them, obviously, the women, of course, but it also hurts men in the sense that, no, I mean, if you want to spend time with me, then you have to treat me with dignity, you have to treat me with respect, and because
Hmm.
that's what I deserve. I think this is where, going back to family life for a minute, like, how children, a crucial thing is how children see mom and dad sort of interacting, right? And when
Yeah.
children see dad respecting mom, it makes it much easier for them to understand, oh, this is how girls should be treated.
Hmm.
And girls too, like, this is how boys should treat me, right? and
Yeah.
and so a lot have not had that experience today, and it's obviously that's much harder, and you have to learn it later on, and you can learn it later on. But those are, I think, some ways that a woman can certainly help a man in his own growth and purity.
Yeah. As you were speaking, Father, I had a thought, because you obviously, when you're in family life, you're in family life, but you have to get to family life as single people. But would you say that one of the core things that both men and women struggle with is like this fear? Women have this fear of seeming incompetent, because with the rise of, like, and to their credit, success, we
Yeah,
have women who are getting really high paying jobs. I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but it's where men need to be needed. Women have a fear of seeming weak
yeah,
to a man and then letting him dominate her. And so she won't give and allow a man to be needed that she first meets. And then at the same time, men don't feel that need. So they stay in this perpetual state of immaturity. And so it's just
Right.
this endless circle where both are terrified of seeming weak. And so they just kind of give into it and don't take the time to learn and grow and develop the virtue of working in tandem, because male and female are supposed to be working together.
Yeah. No, I think you've described it beautifully. And it's like any vicious cycle, it has to be interrupted, right? There has
Yeah.
to be like it's the only way to stop a vicious cycle where each is playing on the weakness of the other. And
Mhm.
not necessarily intentionally or anything like that, but it's just this is where the cultural milieu, this is where the kind of the philosophies that we've just ingested, or have led us, where there's this deep, deep distrust of the other and the other in general, but certainly of the other that you're going to let in closer to your heart, right? And so
Mhm.
there's this kind of fear about too much exposure, too much risk, too much fragility, and there has to be one has to start that process of just being willing to be weak, and like that's
Yeah.
where it becomes small before the other. I mean, it's a deeply Christian thing, right? It certainly doesn't mean that we put up with injustice or domination or people harming
Mhm.
us or abuse or I mean any of that, right? And that's maybe where it happened in the past sometimes, maybe not as much as people, sort of reading back into it, but it certainly did happen and does
Yeah.
happen, right? And so, but to use those exceptions and to say, therefore, I can't be, a healthy sense of submissiveness, right? Not
Mhm.
a sense of kind of like of allowing myself to be walked on, but in a sense that both of us are submitting ourselves to the other, right? That's
Mhm.
the relationship of Christ and his church. And from Ephesians 5, it's that he poured himself out and died for her. Right? And she, of course, gives herself to him, right? And it's this beautiful sense but they both need to have that willingness to be humble. And without that, pride is just going to destroy any relationship. And above all, a relationship as beautiful as the relationship between a man and a woman. Because as you said, when they work in tandem, when they're complementing each other in that powerful, I mean, it's just, there's, the sky's the limit, right? So it's just getting to that
Exactly.
point and breaking that cycle that keeps us from that.
Mhm. Speaking of breaking the cycle, I think a lot of times these deep set wounds can come from a father. Not always, but June, when this airs, will be the month where we talk about fatherhood. And I think that many young men and women, grow up without a strong father figure, or maybe just they don't have a great relationship with their father. So how do you think that young people and just people in general, even, the woman who's married and has a bunch of kids and is still has a father wound, how do you think they can learn to either allow men to compliment them or be good fathers if they didn't have that roadmap provided for them?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think in two stages, like one step is like looking backwards, right? And sort of seeing maybe a better understanding of what happened and what my own family dynamics were like and what I received, what I didn't receive, being grateful for what I did receive, and frankly learning to forgive what I didn't receive, right? No father is perfect out there. And to realize that all of us were imperfectly fathered, and those of us who are fathers are going to be imperfect fathers, right? So some of it has to happen in the past, but without this kind of dwelling on it, and sometimes it can lead to a lot of kind of self-pity and all that, which is not helpful, but an awareness is, and a knowledge. And then looking forward, I would say we can learn
Yeah.
the habits of the good virtues of fatherhood. We can read good books about not just
Hmm.
about fathers, but I mean in literature we can see fathers. We can watch good movies that show great father figures. And I think having father figures in our life, right, whether it's teachers or coaches or mentors or priests or whoever
Hmm.
it might be, other family members, can be hugely helpful and kind of healing for receiving that kind of that paternal and masculine love that we all need. And so
Yeah.
the earlier we see that, the earlier we intentionally fill in some of those gaps, I think the more we can overcome. It's not an easy process, and it's not, in a sense, maybe a process that ever ends, but it's a
Mm.
process that can be that where there can be substantial, very serious, and I've seen it over and over again, real
Yeah.
growth in learning to be a father.
Yeah. There's always hope.
Yeah, for sure. And more than hope, I mean, it's like the Lord is determined to do this, if
Hmm.
we let him, right? He's determined that we find the healing that we need in order to grow in holy purity and to become the men and women we're called to be.
100%. For the man who feels beaten up or bruised by his past choices, where does the journey to reclaiming his masculinity actually begin, besides reading your book?
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Really starts there. No. I mean, I think the first thing is just you can't give up, right? You can't give up. I
Yeah.
mean, I always use the image of like the boxer, right? The boxer is the guy who wins. He's just the guy who's standing at the end, right? He may have been beaten up so many times, maybe he hit the ground, whatever. He just keeps getting up, and he's
Yeah.
still up at the end, and therefore he wins the match. So we cannot give up. I think we have to have that inner conviction that we are called to genuine, lasting, 100% chastity, right?
Mhm.
And 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 I think also, you know, this is where the intentionality thing, going back to the earlier,
Yeah.
question, like figuring out like how I'm falling, what's happening, and falls, maybe big falls or small things or whatever. And, um, there's all kinds of things that's one of the reasons why I did want to do the book in all seriousness, is just to have in one place, like a lot of different things to be looking out for. Also a lot of different ways to kind of counteract them, kind of thinking of defensively, but also offensively. Like it's not just a matter of like resisting the temptation to sin, but it's also like living a more fulfilled and flourishing life. I mean,
Mhm.
the imagination that we talked about earlier is just like there's some beautiful ways of getting our mind to have our mind more filled with just beautiful and delightful, humanly fulfilling things. And
Yeah.
you just kind of squeeze out the bad with the good, and so it's a whole way of looking at life where we can grow in holy purities. I think, obviously confession and mercy and all those things that need to be a part of this too, and receiving steady, receiving grace in many different ways, sacramentally and otherwise, in daily prayer. And so there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, but I would just say that there's always hope, that you can't ever stop getting up, and to be determined with God's grace in the end to settle for nothing but genuine and peaceful chastity.
Yeah. That's a great answer. We're slowly running out of time, but I did want to ask, how can fathers teach their sons to see these classical virtues of purity as heroic and not necessarily restrictive? Because I think that
Yeah.
that's something that a lot of times people look at with the church's teachings and they're like, so many rules, you know?
Right. Yeah. So many rules. And I always like, and maybe it's a little bit cliche, but like, yeah. So, I mean, do you like football? It's like all
Mhm.
these rules in football, these little kind of, or anything else. You'd like to play the piano? Do you enjoy listening to the piano? Like, how many rules went into making that beautiful music?
Or even
There's
just driving on
just
the
driving.
street.
Yeah. Let's just not have any rules when we drive. Rules are, I mean, you can just focus on the rules, but rules are all there for the sake of a greater good, right? If they're just there
Mhm.
for their own sake, that's a problem. Get rid of the rules,
Yeah.
right? Because if it's just a matter of controlling people or something like that. But I think over and over again, we can see how these so-called rules, and there are obviously rules, there were things we should do and there are things we shouldn't do, but how they lead to a much more peaceful, much more flourishing, much happier life, our own life and that of others, because we're not hurting people and we're not being hurt ourselves and we're not hurting
Mhm.
ourselves. So I think the flourishing that is needed does have some rules. But I think helping people understand that freedom, well, number one, understand that there is this kind of, the importance of the rules is about the yes, not about the no. But then the other thing is that freedom is not just about freedom from different things, freedom from sin, freedom from all that, but it's also freedom for something, right? So if, as you're teaching virtue, it's always, whether it's this virtue or any virtue, it's always important to show that it is ordered to something beyond itself. And ultimately, that's a positive thing. It's
Yeah.
not just ordered to kind of overcoming the vices related to that virtue. And so somebody who is prudent, someone who is just, someone who is temperate, someone who is courageous, right? Someone who is filled with faith or hope or charity or whatever the virtue is that you're looking for, is not about like resisting sins against faith, hope, and charity. It's about living that flourishing life and doing so joyfully. So I think that's kind of how we want to talk about freedom. And sometimes we can be our own worst enemies, and how we talk about things, that we don't lead with what is the point of it all, right? We don't
Mhm.
lead with what is positive about this. We lead with what we should be doing. And that, and it's just a matter of like presenting it more accurately.
Yeah, for sure. This has been such a great conversation, Father. Thank you so much for taking the time. Where can people find you, your books? Give people the details.
Well, thanks, Amy. It's been I've enjoyed our conversation too. The book itself is put out by Scepter Press, this one. And so I always encourage people that it's a little bit more costly, maybe, you have to pay for the shipping or whatever it might be, but it's a way of supporting these Catholic publishers that are doing a lot of good work out there, and then without great profit margins, I think. But so to support these, and my other books are all from Emmaus Road. There's a book for families I did called Forming Families, Forming Saints, which might be helpful also. That's an Emmaus Road book, which is sort of translates seminary formation, which I've been doing for most of my priesthood, into family life. So that was kind of a fun
Yeah.
book to do. And they did a beautiful job putting that out. So Anyway, yeah, hopefully it'd be helpful for whoever may be listening. And I'll be certainly praying for this great apostolate too.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all who have listened to the podcast. Be sure to check out Father's books. And as always, we will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fairest Love podcast. In 2026, we continue to share the devotion to Mary, Mother of Fairest Love. If you like what you heard on today's show, please visit our website at fairestlovefamilyproject.org, where you can find additional podcasts and other resources for families. Be sure to also check us out on social media at Fairest Love Project. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you on an episode soon.